Mental illness, the history, the stigma, the cost, and if you think mental health ain't a big fucking issue in this nation, don't get mental over your beliefs. Get the facts. And I'll do my best to actually be factual in this video. The place to begin this video is to clear up what I'm talking about. And that begins with a bit of history. My history. I worked for about 8 years in a state hospital. And back then we used the term mental retardation. Moving forward, I'll use the term that they use today for mental retardation, which is intellectual disability. An intellectual disability is different than mental illness, although it is often gets lumped together with it. Intellectual disabilities affect cognitive functioning, like the ability to learn or reason, and the onset usually happens before the age of 18. The IQ levels of those diagnosed with intellectual disability are also below 70, and those affected require a lifetime of skills training and support. Mental illness, on the other hand, impacts perception, mood, and thought processes. It can happen at any point in a person's life and can be passing, episodic, or chronic. Mental illness has nothing to do with a person's intelligence and is treated with medication, therapy, and changes to lifestyle. And it is mental illness that I'm talking about in this video. And mental illness is part of what makes up your mental health. Your overall mental health is derived from your emotional, psychological, and your social well-being. And your mental health is always changing because shit changes all the time. And that's due to our biology, experiences, and lifestyles. And now, with all this out of the way, let's take a rather quick trip into the history of mental illness. And the first thing you understand is that mental illness is nothing new. In fact, mental illness is part of who we are as a species. Ancient clay tablets going back 4,000 to 5,000 years talk about depression, anxiety, and even psychosis. And the old texts also describe the cause of these early instances of mental illnesses: ghosts, demons, and angry gods. When it comes to our mental health, we humans have had a lot of trouble in defining it and dealing with it. In fact, mental illness is everywhere throughout our human history, and there's also evidence of brain surgery to deal with it going back as far as 10,000 years ago. And in old Greece, they thought it might have something to do with an imbalance in your bodily fluids. And why they thought that, I don't know, but it's better than drilling a hole in your head to let your demons escape. Years later, when the Middle Ages rolled around, those suffering from mental illness were again thought to be possessed by demons, and this was also a time when those who suffered ended up in asylums. By the time of the 18th and 19th century, there was kind of a reform movement going on when it came to those who suffered with mental illness. A couple of visionaries like William Tooth advocated for moral treatment and kindness, along with provisions for physical activity as well as just a good old dose of old-fashioned sunlight. Now to return to intellectual disability, what we once called retardation, know that pretty much up to the 20th century there wasn't a whole lot of difference in how the mentally ill and those who suffered from intellectual disabilities were treated. They threw them all in dark, dirty places where they existed in their own filth. And for those who suffered from intellectual disabilities, those dark, dirty, inhumane places, that didn't change till some dude named Gerardo Rivera came along, and that is a story in itself. While there was some separation for the two fields as far back as the mid-1800s, it wasn't until the mid or late 20th century that shit got serious when it came to your mental health. The early 20th century saw the birth and spread of psychoanalysis, and we all know about Sigmund Freud. In the early 20s and 30s, procedures such as electroshock treatments and lobotomies were among some of the new technologies introduced into the changing modern world to combat the effects of mental illness. And starting in the 1960s, there was a movement to actually start deinstitutionalization and close those dirty, dimly lighted state asylums. But it was a discovery of chlorpromazine, better known as thorazine, that absolutely revolutionized care for those who suffered mental health issues. Thorazine was a reason for that push to deinstitutionalize and move more toward community and home care. And of course, by the end of the 20th century, care for almost all mental health issues were founded on psychotropic medications of all kinds. Now I'd like to close this fine important little video out with the stigma that has been attached to mental health. As I alluded to earlier, way back when people were uneducated, it was thought that those who suffered were possessed or cursed by gods. Hell, we even blame moral failings as the cause, or we believe them to be subhuman, a throwback. And it makes perfect sense that you'd lock someone who was possessed by a demon or a caveman into a deep, dark dungeon, far away from us normal people. It would be nice to believe that stigma no longer exists, but that is, of course, a lie. That said, it is better, so much better, and people are so much more understanding today. And a lot of that is due to the prevalence of mental illness. Almost all of us had to deal with it in some kind of form or fashion. That is how prevalent mental illness is in our lives. And with that said, thanks for taking the time to watch. Mental health. In my entire life, this is one subject that I'm deeply invested in. And that's because I have a son that has schizophrenia. So I'm very well aware of the problems that mental health, what am I trying to say? Mental health is such a huge issue in this country. And I don't know why. I mean, like, is it the food? Have we all done too many drugs or what? I don't know. The diet? But it's an important topic and one that a lot of people just brush off, just cast it aside, and that's wrong. Because you got to deal with it. You absolutely have to deal with it. And one of the most fascinating things about mental health, in my opinion, is how prevalent it is. I was absolutely gobsmacked when my son was still in high school and diagnosed with having schizophrenia. I worked in a high school, and when the word got out, because my son was also a student at the same high school that I was working at, and I wasn't working as a teacher. I was the head of the maintenance department. I had 3 teachers come up to me, set me down and say, "Rob, you're not the only one that has a child with schizophrenia." Think about that. 3 teachers came to me and shared their own stories with me. And I tell you, I took them to heart because I learned from them, and they helped me navigate a horrible, terrible system. And yeah, that mental health system is a horrible, terrible system to have to fucking navigate. And man, I struggled even with advice for the first 4, 5, 10, 12 years. I don't know how long it was. It seems like it was a fucking eternity, but it wasn't. But when it comes to mental health, I'm going to tell you what my mantra is and has been for the last 20 years. We can do a hell of a lot better. I'm going to leave it at that. So, you know what? I hope you learned something from this video. I hope you enjoyed this video in the best sense possible. And, if you have not been exposed to any mental health issues, if you don't have anybody in your family that has mental health issues, if you haven't had to deal with somebody that you love that has mental health issues, you do not know how lucky you are. You are one in a few. You are rare. And with that said, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. I deeply do. Peace out, my friends. Enjoy life as it is.